Hi everybody, it's Martin from Branco Customs here, and in this video I'm going to show you how I made this awesome Japanese Tanto. As is the case with all of the knives that I build, this build is very special. Earlier this year, a couple of my longtime friends approached me, a couple that I've known for probably 25 plus years, and they suggested to me that they wanted to make a katana as a gift to give to their karate teacher, Sensei Lee. So if you're watching this, Sensei Lee, I'm sure you know by now that you've got a very special thing there. And in this video, we're going to tell you all about it and show you how it was made from start to finish with my bare hands and a few of my bare machines that I built myself. When my friends came to me with their idea for this knife, it was important to them that the assembly of it and the materials involved were in some way symbolic as to their journey through learning karate. And with that in mind, we basically ended up choosing a white rayskin bound with the black Suka wrap in the traditional style, with the same way that that would symbolize the transition from a white to black, and everything bound within that is represented. So I started off the process with a 4.5mm thick billet of N690 cobalt stainless steel. I start off by dyeing the steel so that I can then apply the template of the knife onto it and then scribe the profile in order for cutting. Using a thin cut-off disc on a 4-inch angle grinder, I go around the profile as close as I can, but sensibly, leaving a little extra room so I can then go to the grinder and clean that up into a perfect profile. I've taken the liberty of speeding up some of the video processes here to turn what was a week's worth project into just a 40-minute video. Here I'm carefully measuring and scribing the locations of 3 holes where we're going to have a 6mm stainless steel dowel pins, which will hold aged Purple Heart handlewood onto the main tang of the knife. I also scribe and center punch the locations of the stainless steel bolsters at the front of the handle, which will support the guard, and also at the rear. In order to drill through the cobalt stainless steel, even though it's not hardened, a regular high-speed steel drill bit won't do the job very well at all. You'll drill about 2 holes and then it will stop working. So here I use the specialist hardened HSS cobalt drill bits in order to manage to drill through the nice clean holes that will be to precise dimensions. I then scribe the lines onto the blade so I can see where I'm going to grind up to and how thick I'm going to grind to the actual edge of the blade. This is a very critical step because before heat treatment you can't grind the blade too thin or else it will warp or it will crack when you heat treat it due to the internal stresses involved. Here you can also see I then start the grinding process on a wheel which will create a hollow ground blade. This wheel uses a 6-foot long, 2-inch wide ceramic belt in order to cut through the steel in a nice precise manner and leave a beautiful concave edge all the way along the blade. It takes an awful lot of work and hundreds of passes, taking off microns every pass to end up with a nice smooth finish. And of course symmetry is key, so once I've done a nice hollow grind all the way down the full length on one side of the blade, I have to turn it around and try and match it as particularly as possible on the opposite side. Once the rough bevel grinding is completed, I then go over to a flat piece of marble and some abrasive sandpaper in order to clean down the sides of the blade. These edges, I tried to get them as flat and smooth as possible before heat treatment, because trying to do this once the blade is hardened will take literally days and meters and meters and meters of the best quality sandpaper in order to cut through the steel. As you can see here, even before the steel is hardened, because it's such a wide flat area down the edge of the blade, uses a vast quantity of sandpaper and leaves my hands looking fairly covered in metal dust. Extra holes are added into the handle in order to do a couple of different things. Firstly, they help to reduce the weight of the knife, and secondly, they create more surface area for the epoxy to bond with. Because this is a stainless steel knife, the heat treatment process is very complex. The blade itself needs to be wrapped into a protective atmosphere where the stainless tool wrap comes into play. This stainless steel wrap will withstand the heat of being in the furnace up at 1050 degrees centigrade, so that the carbides inside the metal don't actually get burned out. So it's almost like a sacrificial environment that keeps the blade away from oxygen while it's up at temperature. Without this, the blade would be left blackened and burned. Just before wrapping, I add a tiny piece of cardboard into the packet. The idea with this is that that tiny piece of cardboard will ignite when it gets to a certain temperature, and it will burn up any oxygen that's left within the sealed envelope, thus for not allowing any decarburization to occur. Once the steel is soaked at the 1050 degree temperature for a set period of time, it then comes out and is put in between two large aluminium plates and cooled with forced air from our air compressor. This is an air hardening steel, as opposed to dipping into oil like you would do with some traditional steels. This one hardens purely by cooling down in air, so it's a more gradual process than dunking it into oil or water, which leaves a more guaranteed heat treatment result and a straighter blade at the end of it. Once the aluminium plates and the forced air have removed the heat to a sufficient level, I then open up the packet. As you can see, the external layer of the packet has been destroyed by the heat inside the oven. I then have a very small window whilst the blade is still warm in order to double check it for straightness, whereas luckily this one came out perfectly straight, so no straightening was required. It then goes into a tempering oven for 2 hours at 200 degrees centigrade for 2 cycles. Once that stage is finished, it's then onto a very quick buff to get the original finish back onto the knife, and I then go to add my logo before adding any more handles. For doing this, I use an electrical method with salt water on a little piece of foam using a special stencil, and it basically melts and burns its way into the steel, leaving an impression that you can catch your fingernail on that will last a lifetime and never rub off. Immediately after etching, it doesn't look too great, as is always the case with this style, but then a little quick clean up on the wheel and it comes up nice and sharp with crisp edges. It's then back onto the grinding wheel to finish the hollow grind. This again is a particularly tedious process because you must ensure that the blade does not get hot above the tempering cycle temperature. So, for example, there's a thing with knife making where they say if you couldn't hold that piece of steel to your lips without getting burnt, that it's too hot, which can happen very quickly. So it's always a case of using a brand new fresh ceramic belt in order to cut through the hardened steel, and again take off a few microns per pass, spend a couple of hours and make sure it's nice and the blade never gets hot. Once that's done, I go on to a quick buff on the buffing wheel, having got up through multiple different grits up to about a 2000 grit on the main buffing machine. And here is just a little reflection test. You can see how it looks compared to this beautiful flower. Now the business of guards and bolsters comes into play, where I've got some nice bits of 316 stainless steel where I start to drill out the slot for the guard. In this process I use a 3mm drill bit to drill a sequence of holes all the way along the slot, and then I replace that with I think a 3.5mm end mill to go backwards and forwards and end up milling away that slot as closely as I can before then finally finishing it with a hand file to take it to its final dimensions. Here's a quick overall pan of the knife assembly. So we got the main blade itself, we got two bolsters, one guard, two handle slabs, and then two rear bolsters, and the Suka wrap coming on at the end. So the making and fitting of the two bolsters that sit in front of the guard is a very complicated process in its own right. Here we have to make sure that the two pieces are identical with the hole pitches. So what we do is use the blade as a template in order to drill holes into both bolsters, and then we assemble the bolsters together with a couple of temporary pins whilst then grinding their profiles together so the outside fit identically around the two mounting holes. Once they're shaped and nearly ready to fit to the blade, I then have to go into each one of those holes with a tapered reaming pin in order to make sure that the actual hole that runs through it is slightly flared. This way, when I put a couple of pins through it and peen the ends of those pins in order to turn them slightly conical shape, and then put it onto the 12-ton press, you ideally, once it's finished, won't actually see the pin afterwards at all. It's critical again that everything is 1000% clean and there's no oil or grease on any of the parts, because again that will show a line of where the pin goes into the bolster. But done all correctly, you end up with the pins just vanishing completely, which is quite a nice little touch and something that still amazes me every time. And as an interesting side note, it's important to make sure that the pins that you use are exactly the same grade of steel as the actual bolster itself. Because, for example, if you use a 304 stainless steel pin in a 316 stainless steel bolster, you'll be sure that you're going to see a difference in color between the pin and the rest of the bolster. The guard is then actually soldered onto the bolsters using a special low temperature solder so that you won't end up heating the blade more than is necessary and won't damage the temper of the steel. Unfortunately, whilst I did the soldering, my memory card got full and I wasn't able to recover that footage. However, you can use your imagination and see the finished article here. Now the bolster and guard are finished, what I can do is slide the handle material straight up to it and use that as a nice stop so that I can then drill the holes for the handle. Incidentally, the purple heartwood that I'm using for the handle scales and indeed for the Saya / sheath is a piece of wood that I've actually owned personally for over 15 years. I bought it a long time ago thinking I was going to turn it into the handle of a traditional archery bow, but it sat on my shelf as a large block and I thought it would be just ideal for this project. So, very well seasoned. Here I use some West Systems G-Flex epoxy, as is the common standard for knife making, in order to glue the scales and the pins onto the tang of the knife. Once it's dried overnight, as it's a very slow curing epoxy, we come back in order to grind down the pins and finish the shaping of the handle, so we can then move on to doing the back bolsters. And for the bolsters on the pommel of the knife, we use the same process as we did for the ones at the front, by basically using the knife itself as the template in order to push the bolster into its position and then drill the holes through it, and then using the pin press method in order to secure it seamlessly onto the knife. Here you can see the tapered pin reamer in action. It takes it from about a 2.8mm sized taper all the way up to about a 3.5mm. So it's very fine, but certainly enough that once those pins are in there, it's never going to pull back over it. Here you can see me trimming the white ray skin in order for fitment into the side of the handle. Now on a traditional katana they do assemble things slightly differently here, where they tend to have a small groove cut out for a slightly smaller piece of ray skin to slide in. However, I figure this method is going to work nicely, and I'm certainly not going to scrimp on the ray skin, as I've got this whole piece here just to do this one knife. So I think this method is going to work pretty nicely. And now for the Suka handle wrap. Well, this was an education for me, as this is the second one of these that I've ever done in my life, and it certainly is an art form. I've done my best here, and I'm sure a true master at this would probably laugh his socks off if they indeed he wore socks. But here we go, it's my best interpretation of what I can do, and I think it turned out pretty darn well. But I've gone into fast motion here so you can see it all the way through, high speed, as just this handle took me over probably 2/3 of a day to complete. And last but not least, the final knot here was quite a brain teaser. So I indeed had to watch multiple YouTube videos from enthusiasts that knew what they were doing and follow it step by step whilst I tried to repeat exactly what they were showing. There was all sorts of tools that were required, including a ginormous mattress needle, which again I didn't quite have, but I happened to have a tackle box with a fishing hook big enough to catch a large shark on, so I modified that and used that instead, which went pretty darn well. And again, the final end piece is here. This part, traditionally, I believe they use some sort of rice glue in order to hold it together. But I figured, I'm sure if back in the olden days they had contact adhesive, they probably would have used that. So I think that's exactly what I ended up doing. And there we have it, the final handle wrapping, which I think came together not too bad, even if I do say so myself. So there we have the final product, and this brings us to the end of this knife making journey. But one final thought that my friends wanted me to convey was that, like them, this knife started off as simply raw materials, but in the end became so much more than what it was capable of at the start. And if you made it all the way through this video, thank you very much for watching. Please click on the end links to see more videos, and if you like it very much, please click subscribe, like my page, and perhaps come and have a look at my website, brancocustoms.com. I make knives full time, so if you have an idea for a knife that you'd like to make for yourself or for somebody else as a gift, please drop me a message and we'll see what we can do.